And with us now to weigh in on this U.S. Secretary of State diplomatic visit to Africa is U.S. and international affairs analyst Calvin Darkey. Joins us now from Washington, D.C. Calvin, I'd like to say thank you for joining us on the program and welcome. Calvin Rex Tillerson is turning a focus on China-Africa relations, saying that they have too much influence on the continent, that is China there. What priorities do you think he is articulating regarding the U.S. cooperation with Africa?
Specifically, he talked about the indebtedness, and I think that's something that's very important. He mentioned that a lot of times the short-term benefits from Chinese investment, Chinese cooperation might overshadow conditions and long-term effects of these arrangements. Now, this should be seen in the greater context of the U.S.-China relationship, which is all about getting control of the economic relationships in different areas of the world, and the continent of Africa being one of the most important. I also think that it was notable that the Secretary was that definitive in his remarks about Chinese investment, because as many of your viewers have probably seen, the Chinese government responded by saying that their efforts to build partnerships with African countries was not in any way to disadvantage them or to take away from their other relationships. So that remains to be seen. I do think one other important point that Secretary Tillerson's staff made before he left was that a key difference is that the U.S. doesn't directly do infrastructure. They invest, whereas the Chinese do infrastructure and actually bring Chinese workers to build projects, and they don't train the local people.
Calvin, during his meeting with Moussa Faki, the chairperson of the African Union at the AU in Addis Ababa, Tillerson urged African countries to exert pressure on North Korea so that we can achieve denuclearization. Some would think that the North Korean problem may not be one for Africa, which has its own political and humanitarian crisis. Calvin.
I believe that with the current situation with North Korea and Syria, the ongoing tension with Iran, the U.S. is trying to make sure that it has as many allies around the world as it can when they face these crises, which is what every country would do in that case. I do believe that one of the most important parts of this visit, and I've seen some of the leaders that Tillerson has met with have expressed this, is that African countries, the people, the government, and the businesses are sophisticated enough to understand the relationships they pursue and understand where their loyalties are. Okay? Now, when you think about President Trump's administration and his priorities for Africa, they're going to revolve around security. Obviously, the most talked about was going to be economics, as we were mentioning, but we now understand in the U.S. how the problem of extremism, terrorism, and instability across Africa can affect our U.S. interests on the continent and possibly our U.S. interests here in our country.
Calvin, let us talk now about Mr. Trump's widely reported and condemned recent remarks about Africa. Mr. Tillerson dodged all the questions on the reported derogatory comments Donald Trump made. He seems to be finding a hard time dealing with the pall that these comments have cast, isn't he? Talking about Mr. Tillerson.
Well, first of all, just in general, and this was one of the biggest challenges before Secretary Tillerson began his trip, is that he knew, and everyone knew, that the derogatory comments were going to be the subtext for every meeting and every interaction that he had. And as we have seen, the issue was brought up from the very beginning part of his trip. So his goal before he got there, and it continues to be, is to express the genuineness of U.S. partnerships with African countries, and specifically what Rex Tillerson is trying to convey is that the best way to gauge U.S. interest and appreciation of Africa and its partners is what they do, not necessarily what is rumored to have been said. Now, I will say that that was probably one of the most diplomatic ways of dodging the question that I've seen, which shows that Secretary Tillerson understands the tension this has, but that if he can prove the actions that follow the visit are really effective, it will do the most good